What if the very thing you have been seeking, that sense of wholeness, of true alignment, is the precise reason you feel so alone? This is not about finding your purpose or raising your vibration. This is about confronting a far more unsettling psychological reality, that genuine integration, the marriage of shadow and light within the soul, creates a frequency that the collective world fears. It is a disturbance, not a drama you perform, but an invisible current that unsettles those who are still dreaming. Carl Jung spoke of psychic energy as a living force, one that flows not from positive thinking, but from the depths of this integration. This energy is not about being better or more evolved. It is about being undeniably real in a landscape built on illusion. And here is the paradox you may already be living. The signs of this realness are not traits that make you loved or understood. They are markers of a psychic structure so aligned with truth that it becomes a mirror for everything unhealed around you. You may already carry these signs within you and still wonder why your presence quiets rooms, why your solitude feels like a secret power, why you have quietly stopped trying to save anyone, including yourself. This is not a guide to becoming. This is a recognition of what already lives in you, unnamed and unwitnessed. It begins where most fear to look, at the mystery of the silent vibration that changes everything without saying a word. Rest of script, enhanced for flow and retention. When Jung described the process of individuation, he was pointing towards something the feminine has always known but rarely been permitted to embody. It is the journey of separating your essence from the roles assigned to you, the identities projected onto you, the expectations that suffocate your true nature. For women, this process carries a particular weight. You are conditioned to be connective tissue in the lives of others, to hold space, to nurture, to remain accessible and soft and endlessly available. The woman of high vibration does something that feels almost violent in its simplicity. She stops. She stops explaining herself to those who are determined to misunderstand. She stops justifying her boundaries to people who view her self-preservation as selfishness. She stops performing the role of the understanding woman, the patient listener, the emotional sanctuary for those unwilling to do their own inner work. This is not cruelty. This is the first sign, chosen solitude as a portal to the self. There is a difference between isolation born of wounding and solitude chosen from sovereignty. The wounded isolate because they fear connection, because past betrayals have taught them that vulnerability equals danger. But the woman operating from high vibration withdraws because she has learned to distinguish between relationships that nourish her essence and those that exist only to drain it. She feels no obligation to explain this discernment. She does not justify her absence from spaces that demand she shrink. She simply leaves quietly without fanfare. And in that leaving she reclaims something sacred. Jung understood that the individuated self requires separation from the collective unconscious, from the mass psychology that keeps most people asleep within inherited narratives. For women, this separation often appears as a refusal to participate in the unspoken contracts of femininity. She will not gossip to create false intimacy. She will not compete with other women to secure male attention or social approval. She will not twist herself into shapes that betray her knowing just to belong to groups that never truly saw her. This withdrawal is not antisocial. It is the psyche protecting its own integrity. The archetype of the wild woman, as described by Clarissa Pinkola Estes in dialogue with Jungian thought, speaks to this refusal. The wild woman is she who will not be domesticated by culture, who listens to instinct over instruction, who values her inner wilderness more than external validation. When a woman begins to embody this archetype, she often finds herself alone, not because she is unlovable, but because her frequency no longer matches the collective trance. Her solitude becomes the space where she reconnects with the deeper currents of the unconscious, where ancestral voices can finally be heard without the static of social performance drowning them out. You may have noticed that your circle has grown smaller, that friendships which once felt essential now feel hollow, that family gatherings leave you exhausted not from conflict but from the effort required to pretend you still fit the role they need you to play. This is not a failure of connection. It is a shedding of false belonging. And in that shedding, you discover something profound. You are more yourself in solitude than you ever were in crowds that demanded your silence. But chosen solitude carries a paradox. The world interprets your withdrawal as arrogance, as coldness, as a rejection of community itself. People who have never questioned their own participation in toxic dynamics will accuse you of being judgmental, difficult, too much, or not enough. They will ask why you have changed, as if your growth is an offense against their stagnation. And here you encounter the second sign, the one that reveals just how deeply your vibration affects those around you. The silence that disturbs. Silence, in the Jungian sense, is not the absence of voice. It is the presence of the self so complete that words become optional. The woman who has integrated her shadow, who has faced her own darkness and chosen consciousness over comfort, no longer needs to fill every void with speech. She does not explain her decisions to those who lack the capacity to understand them. She does not defend her choices to people still imprisoned by the opinions of others. Her silence is not withholding. It is fullness. And this silence terrifies people because, in the space where she refuses to speak, others are forced to confront their own internal noise. Her calm presence becomes a mirror, reflecting back the chaos they carry within. Jung called this projection, the unconscious tendency to see in others what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The woman of high vibration becomes an involuntary screen onto which the unhealed project their fear, their envy, their unexamined rage. She says nothing, does nothing, and yet her mere existence provokes reaction. This is why she is called cold when she is simply clear. Why she is labeled distant when she is merely boundaried. Why she is accused of superiority when she has simply stopped performing inferiority to make others comfortable. Her silence is not a rejection of connection. It is a refusal to participate in the false intimacy that masquerades as relationship. She will not bond over shared complaints. She will not create closeness through collective victimhood. She will not use words to manipulate or control or secure a position in the social hierarchy. Instead, she listens. She observes. She allows space for what is real to emerge without forcing it. And in a culture addicted to noise, to distraction, to the constant chatter that prevents genuine self-encounter, her silence feels like an accusation. It exposes the emptiness of conversations that go nowhere, the performative nature of most social interaction, the desperate need for validation that drives so much of human behavior. She does not intend this exposure. It simply happens because she has stopped participating in the collective agreement to avoid truth. There is a particular discomfort she generates in group settings. While others fill silence with small talk, with jokes that deflect rather than connect, with gossip that bonds through judgment, she remains still, not withdrawn, not disengaged, but present in a way that requires nothing from anyone. This quality of presence, what Jung might call the manifestation of the integrated self, is so rare that it reads as threatening. Because if she can exist without needing constant affirmation, what does that say about everyone else's addiction to it? Her refusal to participate in the feminine competition for male attention, for social status, for the approval of authority figures, marks her as other. Not because she judges those who do participate, but because she no longer finds meaning in games whose rules she never agreed to. She has accessed something within herself that the culture does not want women to find: her own authority. This brings us to the third sign, perhaps the most liberating and most lonely: the refusal to save or be saved. The core Demeter-Persephone complex, as explored in Jungian psychology, describes the archetypal relationship between mother and daughter, between the one who nurtures and the one who remains dependent. In myth, Persephone is abducted to the underworld, and Demeter's grief brings winter to the earth until her daughter returns. This dynamic plays out in countless ways in women's lives. The mother who lives through her children. The daughter who cannot separate from maternal approval. The endless cycle of rescue and dependency that masquerades as love. The woman of high vibration has exited this cycle entirely. She no longer sees herself as responsible for the emotional well-being of others. Not because she lacks compassion, but because she understands that true compassion does not mean taking on the work that belongs to another soul. She will not save her partner from his own darkness. She will not rescue her children from necessary pain. She will not carry the unprocessed grief of her parents or friends or community. This is not coldness. This is psychological maturity so rare it appears almost inhuman. Similarly, she does not wait to be saved. She does not seek a father figure to grant her permission to exist fully. She does not look for a guru, a teacher, a lover who will finally see her worth and reflect it back to her. She has integrated what Jung called the anima and animus, the contrasexual aspects of the psyche that allow her to access both receptive and assertive energies without dependence on external figures to provide what she lacks. She becomes her own authority, her own witness, her own source of validation. This integration does not make her invulnerable. It makes her honest. She knows her limits. She asks for help when needed, but from a place of clarity rather than desperation. She does not collapse into helplessness to manipulate others into caretaking. Nor does she perform hyperindependence to prove she needs no one. She simply exists in the truth of each moment, allowing herself to be supported without becoming dependent, offering support without becoming enmeshed. The world finds this deeply unsettling because, if she can release people to their own paths, if she can watch someone she loves make destructive choices without intervening, if she can hold space for suffering without trying to fix it, then all the unspoken contracts that bind most relationships begin to dissolve. The contract that says love means sacrifice. The contract that says caring means controlling. The contract that says, if you truly loved me, you would prevent my pain. She breaks these contracts not through rebellion, but through embodied knowing. She has learned, often through great suffering, that you cannot do another person's inner work for them. That genuine transformation happens only when the individual chooses it from within. That the most loving act is sometimes to step back and allow the consequences of choices to unfold, even when it hurts to witness. This is the wisdom of non-invasion. The archetypal knowing that each soul must walk its own path into wholeness. People leave her life. Sometimes they storm out, angry that she will not engage in the drama they need to feel alive. Sometimes they drift away, unable to tolerate the quiet accountability her presence demands. Sometimes they return years later, when they have done their own work and can finally meet her where she stands. She allows all of it. She does not chase. She does not punish. She does not hold grudges or plot revenge. She simply continues on her path, knowing that the right people will match her frequency when the time is right, and that forcing connection only creates suffering for everyone involved. But let us not romanticize this position. The high vibrational woman is not a perfected saint floating above human messiness. She carries shadow too. There is a particular temptation that comes with this level of consciousness. A subtle arrogance that whispers she has figured something out that others have not. This is the shadow of the integrated self, the risk of spiritual bypassing dressed in Jungian language, the danger of using wisdom as a shield against vulnerability. She must remain vigilant against the seduction of seeing herself as superior, as more awake, as having transcended the struggles that still bind ordinary people. Because the moment she identifies fully with the archetype of the wise woman or the crone before she has fully embodied it, she falls into inflation, into the ego's need to be special, even in its spirituality. Jung warned repeatedly about the dangers of identifying with archetypes rather than integrating their lessons. The woman who believes she is beyond ego has simply found a more sophisticated way for ego to operate. High vibration does not exempt her from rage, from envy, from exhaustion, from doubt. It does not mean she never feels the sting of loneliness or the ache of being misunderstood. What it means is that she no longer abandons herself when these feelings arise. She does not repress them in the name of positivity. She does not perform peace while violence churns beneath. She allows the full spectrum of her humanity to exist without judgment, integrating each emotion as information rather than evidence of failure. This is the real work. Not ascending beyond the human but descending fully into it. Not becoming so spiritual that she floats above life, but becoming so grounded that she can hold all of life within her without fragmenting. The paradox is that the more integrated she becomes, the more she is perceived as cold, as distant, as unfeeling by those who measure love through emotional reactivity, because she will not mirror their chaos back to them. They assume she feels nothing. In truth, she feels everything. She has simply learned not to be destroyed by her own depth. There is a particular loneliness that comes with this territory. One that cannot be solved by finding the right community or the perfect partner. It is the loneliness of living at a frequency that few others inhabit. Of seeing through illusions that most people still believe are real. Of being unable to return to the innocence of unconsciousness once you have tasted true awareness. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unknow what you have integrated. And so you walk a path that few understand, that fewer celebrate, that appears from the outside like isolation but from the inside feels like the only honest way to live. This brings us to something rarely discussed in spiritual circles, the invisibility of genuine transformation. When a woman undergoes the process of individuation, when she integrates her shadow and aligns with her true self, there is no applause, no recognition, no external validation that confirms the magnitude of what she has accomplished. The people who knew her before do not understand who she has become. The people who might recognize her now have not yet met her. She exists in a liminal space, a threshold between identities belonging fully to neither. The collective does not reward deep inner work. It rewards performance. The woman who posts about her healing journey on social media gets attention. The woman who actually heals in silence remains unseen. The woman who speaks the language of transformation without embodying it finds community. The woman who embodies it without needing to speak about it finds solitude. This is not a complaint. It is simply the truth of how consciousness operates in a world still largely asleep. She has stopped telling her story not because it is not worth telling, but because she no longer needs witnesses to validate that it happened. She has stopped seeking recognition for her growth because she understands that true evolution is an internal affair, one that shifts the structure of the psyche in ways that cannot be photographed or celebrated or turned into content. Her revolution is invisible. It occurs in the quiet moments no one sees. In the choices she makes when no one is watching. In the steady alignment with truth that requires no audience. This invisibility can feel like death. Because in a culture that equates visibility with value, to be unseen is to not exist. But she has learned a different measure. She knows her worth not through the eyes of others, but through the quality of her own presence. She feels her growth not in likes or followers or invitations, but in the increasing simplicity of her inner landscape, in the decreasing need for external drama, in the growing capacity to hold paradox without collapsing into either extreme. And yet, the world will interpret her withdrawal as failure. They will say she has given up, become bitter, lost her spark. They will not see that what they call spark was actually performance. What they call giving up was actually letting go. What they call bitterness was actually clarity. She no longer argues with these interpretations. She no longer defends her choices to those who are determined to misunderstand. She has learned that you cannot be truly seen by those who are still looking through the lens of who you used to be. The woman who has transmuted her energy into something higher and truer finds herself in a strange position. She is no longer who she was, but she has not yet fully become what she is becoming. She exists in the space between, in the void that precedes rebirth, in the silence that holds more truth than any words could convey. This is not a comfortable space. There is no glory here. No triumphant moment where everything makes sense. Just a quiet, persistent knowing that she is on the right path, even when the path looks like nothing from the outside. What then remains when everything else falls away? What is left when the woman of high vibration no longer needs to prove, to explain, to belong, to be seen, to be understood? This is where we arrive at the essence, at what Jung called the self in its most distilled form. What remains is simplicity. Not simplicity as a lack of depth, but simplicity as the natural state of a psyche no longer at war with itself. She returns to the small things. The feeling of sunlight on skin. The taste of water. The sound of her own breath moving in and out without effort. She notices the ordinary with the attention most people reserve for the extraordinary, because she has discovered that the extraordinary was always hiding in the ordinary, waiting to be recognized. This is not a New Age platitude about gratitude. This is the lived experience of a woman who has faced her shadow, integrated her darkness, and emerged with a reverence for life that does not require life to be anything other than what it is. Her vibration, this thing that has caused so much disruption, so much misunderstanding, so much loneliness, is not something she cultivated. It is what remained when she stopped trying to be anything other than real. It is the natural frequency of a soul aligned with its own truth, unfiltered by the need for approval, undiminished by the fear of rejection, uncomplicated by the performance of identity. This frequency does not make her better than anyone. It simply makes her unmistakable to those who are ready to recognize it. And here is the invitation that lives at the center of this exploration. You do not need to become high vibrational. You need to stop pretending you are anything other than what you already are. Beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the roles, beneath all the identities you have worn to survive in a world that punished your authenticity, there is a frequency that is entirely yours. It has always been there. It has been waiting for you to remember. The three signs we have explored, the chosen solitude, the disturbing silence, the refusal to save or be saved, these are not achievements to be unlocked. They are recognitions of what is already operating in your psyche when you allow yourself to be honest. You may already carry all three and not yet have named them. You may have been living this way for years while wondering why you feel so different, so alone, so unable to fit into the world as it is presented to you. There is no certificate for this work. No graduation ceremony. No moment where someone hands you a badge that says you have arrived. There is only the quiet knowing that you have stopped abandoning yourself, that you have chosen truth over comfort, that you are willing to be misunderstood by everyone if it means you no longer misunderstand yourself. This is not a path that leads somewhere. It is a way of being that reveals itself more fully the longer you walk it. You are invited to stop seeking external confirmation of your evolution, to stop looking for signs that you are doing it right, to trust the quiet interior knowing that needs no validation from a world that fears what it cannot control. Your vibration does not need to be named to exist. It does not need to be understood to be real. It simply is. And the more you allow it to be exactly what it is, the more you discover that high vibration was never about transcending the human experience. It was always about inhabiting it so fully that there is no part of you left in exile. If these words have found you, if something in this exploration has stirred recognition rather than aspiration, perhaps you already know what you needed to remember. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not failing at connection because you refuse to participate in what is false. You are simply living at a frequency that not everyone can hear. And that is not a problem to be solved. It is a truth to be honored. This channel exists for women who walk this path in silence, who need no applause but occasionally crave the recognition that they are not alone in their aloneness, who understand that the deepest transformations happen without witnesses. If you found something here that resonated, you are welcome to share your experience. Not to perform your wisdom but to mark your presence. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring these territories with others who understand that true spirituality is not about escaping darkness, but learning to carry your own light through it. The conversation continues not because we need to convince anyone of anything, but because some truths are too important to leave unspoken, even when we know they will only be heard by those ready to listen.